It's 8 o'clock somewhere. We're live. Thank you very much, Ms. Shippen. Welcome to Labor and Health for those who haven't been here yet this year. We welcome you. Couple of rules. We should have one of you guys come up and tell us the rules of our committee. If you have a cell phone, please turn it off. If you don't turn it off, you run the risk of having to buy donuts for our Friday meeting. Okay, couple of reminders before we get started this morning, before we do roll. Number one is, I go over all the rules of decorum, but I think they're pretty straightforward. We treat each other with respect in here, including the committee and those who give testimony. No name calling. I prefer that the audience doesn't clap and cheer when Senator Barlow speaks, although it's common for that to happen. We like respect in here, and we like everybody to get along. We all have different opinions, we know that, but we need to do that within respectful means. With that in mind, let's go ahead and do roll.
Senator Barlow.
Present.
Senator Bouchard.
Here.
Senator Dockstader.
Here.
Senator Hutchings. Here. Chairman Baldwin.
Here,
We have 5 present, Mr. Chairman.
we're all here. We have a full quorum. One item of business before we start. Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Chairman, I would move that the committee pulls from the table House Bill 24, Certificate of Need, and takes it up at our Friday meeting time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Committee, we have a motion on the floor to pull certificate, and you recall that we talked about that last meeting. It was put on the table as we felt there were more questions and things that needed to be answered. With that in mind, we're going to revote. If we do pass this motion, an aye vote means that on Friday, we will bring that back up and go through that. We will have shorter testimony since we've already had some, but we will do that at a Friday meeting. So that motion, everybody understands that motion. Any questions on the motion? Seeing none. Let's just do a raise of hands, will be easier because I'm deaf this morning. All those in favor of bringing that back off the table and discussing on Friday, raise your hands. Seeing 3, that motion passes. Friday, we will be hearing House Bill 24, Certificate of Need repeal. So we'll need to put out the notice for that. Okay. With that in mind, we gavel in at 9:30, so we have an hour and 29 minutes now to do this bill and work it. I think that's certainly possible. But so I would remind those who testify, those who get up, that we need to keep it reasonably short. I mean, I want to hear all your thoughts, but we need to get through everything and let the committee work it so we can be done with it and take care of the bill today. Representative, come on forward. The House bill is House Bill 148, Regulation of Surgical Abortions. Tell us about your bills, Representative.
Thank you, Chairman Baldwin, and good morning to the House Labor and Health Committee. For the record, I'm Martha Lawley, House District 27, and I appreciate the opportunity to present to you today House Bill 148, Regulation of Surgical Abortions. Mr. Chairman, with your permission, I would like to provide a little bit of background and then a brief description of the bill, and then we can go through the bill in more detail if the committee would like.
Please do that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In June of 2022, the U.S. Supreme Court issued a landmark decision overruling Roe versus Wade in the case of Dobbs versus Women's Health Organization. The court concluded that the Constitution, the U.S. Constitution, did not protect the right to an abortion, and therefore each state has the right to determine all matters related to abortion in their state. You may recall that the Wyoming legislature, I think it was in 2021, I wasn't in the legislature, but they passed what's called a trigger bill. And so there was a bill prohibiting abortions in Wyoming if the court overruled Roe versus Wade. And under that trigger bill, there were some limited exceptions. We also passed another bill last session called Life as a Human Rights Bill, House Bill 152, which also prohibited abortions with limited exceptions. However, as you may also know, those laws have been enjoined by a court in Wyoming while they considered the matter of their constitutionality. And so where it stands right now is the district court hasn't issued opinion yet, but that the law is enjoined, it's stayed, it's not being enforced, and likely if it goes on to the Wyoming Supreme Court, that injunction will likely stay in place. So right now, as we sit here, abortion is legal in Wyoming, even though the legislature has passed 2 laws to say it is prohibited in Wyoming. So This bill is about basically this fact: as long as abortion is legal in Wyoming, Wyoming has an obligation to protect the health and safety of women who choose to get an abortion. And so that's what this bill is about. It is about, in my view, common sense regulations of abortion procedures in Wyoming. And the bill provides for safety and surgical abortions initially. It was amended in the House to include chemical abortions, and we can talk more about that as we go through the bill, providing some regulation of those types of procedures. First and foremost, 148 provides that each surgical abortion facility in Wyoming shall be licensed as an ambulatory surgical center in accordance with Wyoming Statute 35-2, 901 through 914. So we have a system to regulate ambulatory surgical procedures. And really, an abortion falls within an ambulatory surgical procedure, in my view, and should be just included under that statute and treated in that way and regulated in that way, again, for the health and safety of the woman who would choose the abortion. And so, Mr. Chairman, I'm ready if you want to walk through the bill, if you would like to do that, and then we can talk about it. Is that
Go
good?
ahead, walk us through.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So you're going to see a technical correction amendment. We'll go over that at the time. That has to do with the title. So again, page 1 is the title, and then we move over to page 2, and we have a set of a number of definitions. I'll just point out that the definition that you see on page 2 and on to page 3 of abortion is the same definition that is in the bill we passed last year, which is the Life as a Human Right Act. So we use the same definition there. Then you get down over to page 3, line 9, and we define what a hospital is. On page 3, line 12, we define what a physician is, and then 15, what a pregnancy is. And then in line 321, what is reasonable medical judgment. And then we see again definitions of what is a surgical abortion. We didn't have a statute that defined surgical abortion, so we included a definition here. And I will say that this language has some unique things about it. It has a little exception in it, and this is an exception that's been requested by pro-life doctors, so that in the situation where they had an emergency, or they had a situation where they needed to perform an abortion to protect the life of a mother, that they wouldn't be considered kind of an abortion, surgical abortion facility. This specific language has actually been approved by the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals during what I will call the Roe era, and that may become important later when we talk about the distinction between what are the laws concerning these matters, what were they under Roe versus Wade, where there's a constitutional right in play. Yes, sir?
I believe we've got one question for you.
Yes.
Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So please be specific when you're talking about language and you're bringing highlight to it. Just give us the line numbers that you're
Sure.
referring to. That would be helpful so I can highlight it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you,
Rick.
Mr. Chairman. We're looking at page 4, lines 13 through 18, where we define surgical abortion, and we provide a limited exception in there. And this limited exception language, as I said, has been approved by the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals under a challenge of whether or not it might violate the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, and it does not. They held that it does not. Again, under what I'd call the Roe standard, which was a much stricter standard. And as we move on then, on page 5, at the top, we start with kind of what I call the meat of the bill. So 1 through 6, we see that each surgical abortion facility in Wyoming shall be licensed as an ambulatory surgical center in accordance with the Wyoming statute I referred to earlier, and the rules of the Department of Health. And then we talk about how each surgical abortion facility shall have separate licenses. So even if one person owns several in the state, each facility has to have its own independent license. We're now on page 5, lines 8 through 10, and it basically just states that no surgical, once this law is enacted, there can be no surgical abortions until there's licensing as ambulatory care centers. Page 5 Paragraph C on line 12, it basically just says that you shall comply with all rules of the ambulatory surgical center's license, and licenses are not transferable or assignable. And then we go on to, on page 5, to a section that's going to be about requirements for physicians. And on line 18, it says each licensed physician performing at least one surgical abortion at a surgical abortion facility shall do these things. The first one, Romanet I, on page 5, line 22, is to report and attest. So they must report the abortions they performed. And I will say already there's a kind of reporting in place of abortions. But this is a report that does two things, and one of which is not done, and these to be, I believe, accompanied together. That is to report each surgical abortion that that physician performed, and shall attest in the report that the physician is licensed and in good standing with the State Board of Medicine. Then we go on page 6, looking at line 4. This is a submission of documentation that they have admitting privileges no more than 10 miles from between this, at a hospital not more than 10 miles from the surgical abortion facility. So they make that submission and documentation. And then if we move down on page 6, line 11, any person who violates this section shall be guilty of a misdemeanor. So this is for these provisions concerning the physicians. This is the penalty if they do not comply with those or found to not be in compliance with those, and it's $1,000. And it can go on per calendar day while they're in violation. So but that relates specifically to the above provisions. So on page 6, moving on to line 20, surgical abortion facilities can only be performed by a doctor licensed in the state of Wyoming. Then we move over to page 7, and we again have a penalty, and this is the more strict penalty within the statute or within the bill, and this is for physicians who would come into Wyoming who are not licensed in Wyoming but would perform surgical abortions. And the penalty is a felony, 1 to 14 years for doing that. And again, this is a response. This provision specifically comes from doctors that have had to deal with the botched abortions where something went wrong, and these women were brought to a hospital, and their concern about the fact that the doctors were not properly licensed. So on page 7, moving on to section C on line 7, physicians must have admitting privileges within 10 miles of the surgical abortion, at a hospital within 10 miles of the surgical abortion facility. The first one over here on 6 just said they have to submit documentation that that's true. Here in the statute, it's just requiring that they meet that requirement. And again, this is a really important provision because one of the biggest issues that we've seen, and the reason I believe we need to do something like this, has to do with continuity of care. When something goes wrong, whether it's something that they didn't know about the health of the mother, that I'm not suggesting it's also malpractice related, or just when something goes wrong, when we don't have some of these procedures concerning admitting privilege, et cetera, we lose something very important, and it's continuity of care. And anecdotally, I've heard stories of women being taken literally kind of just dropped off at an emergency room. She doesn't have really much ability to give the kind of information that's needed and those kind of things. And that can delay the ability of medical help to understand what's going on or what went wrong or what happened. And so, again, these provisions come with this protection of continuity of care. And then you see on page 7, lines 13 through 19 is a penalty for violating these provisions above, and it is $1,000 at a misdemeanor. At the bottom of page 7, you just see a direction for the department to promulgate rules as necessary. And then on page 8, lines 4 through 6, we call for the regulations to not become less stringent for surgical abortion facilities, that they are the same as all ambulatory surgery procedures. And then on page 8, lines 8 through 10, we provide for facility inspection every 3 years. And then on page 8, lines 14 through 18, there's a provision that's kind of a conflicts provision, we would call it legally, but it says that the life is a human right law is controlling if enforceable. And so the effect of that is that, as we hope, that the Life is a Human Right bill will be held constitutional and upheld and enforceable, then it will rule over these provisions. So then we look on page 8 at the bottom, where again, we'll talk about a technical correction there in that subheading. And then going on to page 9, this is where we amended on the floor of the House to include chemical abortions in this bill. And the provision here basically says that not less than 48 hours before a pregnant woman procures the drugs or substances for a chemical abortion, or before a physician or pharmacist dispenses the drug or substances necessary for chemical abortion, or before a pregnant woman undergoes surgical abortion, the physician or pharmacist shall ensure that the pregnant woman receives an ultrasound in order to determine gestational age of the unborn child. And it's also to determine the location of the pregnancy and to verify a viable intrauterine pregnancy. And then basically, it basically protects chemical abortions and providing certainty. Sometimes there can be situations where you don't have an intrauterine pregnancy, and using those drugs for chemical abortion could affect the health of the woman. And so we'll have more on that. There's a speaker coming after me that will talk a little bit more about that. But as we move down then on page 9 to line 21, and as moving over, what we're doing here is now moving over to the ambulatory surgical center statute, and we are amending the definition of ambulatory surgical center. And again, the current definition, and I think this is important to hear, so we know what we're talking about when we use that term. The term as it exists now in statute it means a facility which provides surgical treatment to patients not requiring hospitalization and is not a part of a hospital or offices of a private physician, dentist, or podiatrist. And we are amending that to add, as you'll see on lines 5 and 6, ambulatory surgical centers shall include any surgical abortion facility as defined by Wyoming Statute 356201A Romanet 7. And going on page 10, section 3, are some provisions. Number 1 on lines 10, it's actually A, section so on lines 10 and 11, nothing in this act shall be construed as creating an individual right to abortion. Lines 13 through 16, it is the intent of the legislature that this act shall not be construed as holding abortion as lawful in the state pending a decision from the court of competent jurisdiction on the current state law. And then lines 18 through 22, it is the intent of the legislature that this act shall not recognize or define abortion as a healthcare decision under Article 1, Section 38 of the Wyoming Constitution. And then on page 9, we have on lines 1 through 16, some additional language.
Did we go backwards, Representative? We were on page 10. You
Oh,
went
I'm
back.
sorry, I did go backwards. You are exactly right. I was thinking, I think I've already been over that. Thank you so much. On page 11, we're finally to the last page. It basically tells us on lines 1 and 2 that the department shall promulgate all rules necessary to implement the act, and then the act will be effective immediately. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I will stand for questions.
Very good. Committee, you have questions for Representative Lawley? Senator Dockstader.
Representative Lawley, on page 10, where you add 356201, just a little summary, what did we put in there for surgical center? What did we add in that reference?
Representative.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Senator Dockstader, on page 10, on the ambulatory surgical center,
Correct.
We are adding the line underline 5 and 6 is what we're adding, where it's underlined there, lines 5 and 6. Above that is what the current definition
And
is.
Mr.
And then
Chairman,
we're,
how is it defined now then in statute?
Go ahead, Representative.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, what you have above is how ambulatory surgical centers are currently defined, and we are amending it by adding a sentence at the end that you see there underlined.
Okay, further questions, committee? Go ahead, Senator Hutchins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, as we go through this bill, Representative Lawley, when you first go through it, you're thinking, boy, this is so restrictive. This is doing this. You've covered so many bases and you've done them very well. When I hear you speak, you can tell me this isn't trying to be restrictive, but it's trying to be protective. Is that what you see? Because that's what I'm seeing as you went through it thoroughly. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Representative.
thank you. Senator Hutchings, excuse me, you're correct, that basically these are common sense regulations for the protection of the woman as long as abortion remains legal in Wyoming. One court called these similar type of regulations a typical set of health and safety standards for this type of medical procedure. And you might wonder, Senator Hutchins, why weren't we doing this before? And that would be a good question. But it really goes back to the state of the law under Roe versus Wade. By creating a federal constitutional right to an abortion, put a lot of restrictions on what states could or couldn't do. The Fifth Circuit case I cited you earlier, Tucson Women's Health Group versus Eden, was in 2004. So it was under Roe versus Wade, but it was typical of the kinds of challenges to any kind of common sense regulation. So in many cases, some states didn't even try to do much in terms of regulating abortions because they were always had to meet a high standard of whether or not it was overly burdensome to this constitutional right. Now that we are under Dobbs, what I'll call the Dobbs era, that is all completely changed. Because by declaring there is no constitutional right and recognizing it as the state's obligation, we really have a wide open field concerning what the state can do, regulation all the way to prohibition. So we just focused on, obviously, when Dobbs came out, the prohibition side. But while it remains legal, we owe the women of Wyoming, we owe them the protection that they might even assume they already have, to be honest with you. Thank you.
Okay, further questions, committee? Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'll just have two questions. One is on page 8, this is the applicability, talks about the two bills that were passed last year, Life is a Right Act, and then the other one is the chemical abortion. And so my question is when so referring to those two, when we go back to the beginning of the bill on pages 2 and 3, where we talk about the, I guess for lack of a better term, the exceptions, the 4 exceptions. So there is at least, and I don't have the Life is a Right Act, but I have the chemical abortions ones, and there's certainly more exceptions in that than are reflected in your bill. So I just asked, one, if you would explain, Matt, and I can look at it, I can talk to you about it. It's incest is a part of that bill, so is sexual assault. Anyway, there's a couple other nuances in there that are not in this, so that's one. And two, Mr. Chairman, if I could, you're an attorney. Tell me the effects of this ex post facto. If there's a facility that's doing these things right now, would this be applicable to them? Would they have an ex post facto case to be made? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Barlow, first on the exception, are you talking about the definition? Would you direct me again to the page you're talking about in the bill and the exceptions? Are you talking about?
Go ahead, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So applicability, there are definitions, and you have a definition of what an abortion is. And then in the chemical abortion bill that was passed last year, there are exceptions to how that is applied. It's not a definition per se, but it is different than what I see here as exceptions. So you talked about the other bill we passed last year, this being identical to that. I don't have it in front of me, so I don't know that. But it's certainly different than 139, which is also referenced on page 8. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative.
Again, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Barlow, I would say that a decision was made to follow the life is a human right definition of abortion in this bill and to try to keep as consistent as we could. You've made a good point, but it points out that we didn't have total consistency there, but there were, I think there's some distinctions between those two ways to obtain an abortion that might have made the one the way it was. So, but there was an attempt to be consistent. So for this statute, this is the definition and the exceptions that we've put in here, and that was the reason. And then Senator Barlow, again, ex post facto, this law is forward. Ex post facto has about like going back, but from the point of the passage of this law, any currently operating abortion facility will have to become licensed as an ambulatory surgical center. That's really not ex post facto, is the way it's understood in the law. It's saying that from this point forward, it's not going back and saying because you weren't, you're going to be penalized under penalties here, under any of these sections. So it's from this point forward, and that is not indeed legally considered ex post facto.
Okay, further questions, committee? I've got a couple of things just looking through the bill, and these are not necessarily questions, but I'll form them as questions. Starting on page 5, it kind of feels like we're replowing some ground that's already in statute. Bottom of page 5, line 22, talking about reporting each surgical abortion. It's already in statute that they have to report, anybody has to report any. So that would be a repetitive thing that's already in statute. Turning to page 6, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the physician is licensed and in good standing with the State Board of Medicine. I believe that any physician out practicing, doing any kind of medicine, surgery, whatever kind of medicine, already has to be in good standing with the Board of Medicine. And that would be repetitive as well, that they're already in violation of the law. If they're practicing surgery or medicine in the state of Wyoming without a license, licensed by the State Board, they're already in violation. That would be my first question. Second, now I got, and there again, same issue on the bottom of page 6. Any surgical abortion performed by a surgical abortion facility in the state shall only be performed by a physician licensed in the state of Wyoming. I believe that's already covered. Anybody who's doing any kind of surgery, practicing medicine, it already has to be licensed in the state of Wyoming, whether they live in another state and come here and practice, or whether they live here and practice. They have to be licensed within the state of Wyoming. I'll stop there. I have a few more, actually one more question or something to point out, and that would be on line 7, or page 7, excuse me, line 14. We're referring back to section C, and I could be wrong again, but I don't believe a pharmacist can perform a surgical abortion, and that's what we're referring back to. So pharmacist, maybe if it fits in when we're talking about chemical abortions, but in this paragraph, we're referring back to section C, and that's solely surgical abortions. So I believe pharmacists may be out of place there.
Yeah.
So we'll stop there. Any response to any of those things?
Yes, Mr.
Go ahead,
Chairman.
Representative.
Thank you so much. Yes. First, let's go to the first question you raised on page 5, lines 22 and 23. You are correct that there's already a reporting just of number of abortions performed. What we add here that is significant is that they shall attest in the report that they are licensed and in good standing. That kind of goes up to the second part of your question on top of page 6. It's all the same section. And that's something that isn't done yet, to couple those two together and make an attestation of that fact. And one of the things as we were putting this bill together is wanting to really be clear in our intent that surgical abortion facilities were not, once they came under ambulatory care, treated differently. And but there were a few places we felt that we needed to be sure that the reporting of the abortion and the fact that they are in good standing was important in protection. So that's why that's there. I'm going to try to find the next one. At the bottom of page 6, again, you probably are correct. There's a little bit of wanting to be really clear with regard to the surgical abortion facilities and how they're regulated. So that lines 20 to 22, maybe just restating current law. And then, where was your other, I don't recall.
Page 7, line 14, the pharmacist.
Yes, yes. I think you have a good point there.
If a pharmacist is performing surgical abortions, they might be outside their
Right.
scope of practice. Go ahead, Senator Hutchins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm gonna go over what I see on 7, lines 13 and 14. It says if any person violates subsection 3 of this section, and then it says, or if a pharmacist or physician violates Wyoming statutes 356205, they shall be guilty. So I think that or is the distinguishing mark. It's not like saying the pharmacist or is performing the surgical abortion. It just says, or if they violate the statute, and then we'd have to find 356205 to find out what that
Good.
what that means. That's what I'm seeing. I don't know if everybody else sees that, but I think that sentence seems to be okay.
Yeah, I don't think it's a fatal flaw in the bill by any means. I just.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for bringing it up.
Senator Bouchard.
I see that section C, it's because of it's prescriptive on what a pharmacist can do in other parts of the bill, so that's what I see there.
Okay, further questions for Representative Committee? Seeing none, thank you, stand by. Oh, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to, I think you have a written copy of some proposed technical
Sure, go
amendments.
ahead and
that-
walk us through that real quick.
All right. So what I'm asking to do is help me work with the title a little bit, the catch title. So you see the first one is page 1, above line 1, where it says regulation of surgical abortions to delete the word surgical. And these all relate to how we amended in the provisions on chemical abortion in the House on the floor. And then you see on line 3 of this proposed amendment, page 1, line 3, asking you to, after the word perform, to insert chemical and surgical abortion. And then the other one is on page, there's 2 on page 8. First is on line 20, we are going to delete the balance of the line after the word facilities. So that's licensure and requirements, and we're going to put ultrasounds. So again, we're actually deleting the line from facilities all the way through line 21, and then we are inserting the word ultrasound, so. But just,
Okay, which brought to mind my other question. Sometimes my mind works like that. Ultrasounds, not that they're a bad idea or not that they're a good idea. I'm just curious, is this an unfunded mandate? Who's gonna pay for the ultrasound? We don't prescribe that in here because it won't be covered by insurance because it's not medically indicated. So I'm curious who's gonna pay for that.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for that question. There are many crisis pregnancy centers around the state that provide ultrasounds for free. So we believe that they will be able to obtain ultrasounds at no or low costs. And I would say that depending on the situation with the mother, insurance might pay for the ultrasound. I don't believe we can definitively say they will not, so,
I will tell you in my world, they probably won't.
yeah,
That's addressed in another bill that we already did, talking about prior authorization.
yes.
My additive to that would be, do you know where the ones that do it for free, do you know where they're located in the state? Are they readily available across the state, or is somebody in rural Opal, Wyoming gonna be able to get one without traveling 100 miles?
Well, there are a number of them located across the state, but I would urge you to keep in mind that the the surgical abortion facilities are located in metropolitan areas. There's actually one remaining, but there was one previously in Teton County, and then there's one right now in Natrona County, so,
Okay, thank you, Representative. We'll let you have a seat. Any representatives or legislators in the room, real quick, if you would. Keeping in mind that we've used a third of our time, so we're on a time constraint here, so make your testimony as quick as you can. Introduce yourselves. Welcome. You're not welcome, Senator Boner. You belong in this house. We'll let the Senator Bonner, go ahead, sir.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that was a very thorough review. I don't have much to add. In full support of the bill, so long as we are not, our laws are not in effect regarding whether abortion will be legal or not. It's absolutely imperative that we enact some basic standards to ensure the safety of the mother. So that's my interest in the bill. Obviously, it's a bit of a constituent issue in Neshonoc County, and I'll stand for any questions.
Questions for Senator Bonner? Seeing none. Representative.
Good morning, Senators, Representative Chip Nyman. Also, don't want to take much of your time. I appreciate the testimony, the good testimony, the good representative that put all that information together for you. I will say that there are 10 crisis pregnancy centers across the state of Wyoming that give completely confidential and free ultrasounds to any folks that want to come in there and apply for those. And so as far as, that was some discussion that was had on the floor, is that would be an unfunded mandate, but quite frankly, there is multiple opportunity to be able to have a free and very confidential ultrasound if the lady would so see fit and choose in this situation. So, but otherwise I would stand for any questions. And I do have some information as far as enough the senators would be willing to indulge me as kind of as to the reasoning behind wanting to bring that amendment in the House in a couple of minutes, if you wouldn't mind. I would like to share that.
As long as it's quick, you're good.
Okay, thank you, sir. Acceptable standard of care is to obtain an ultrasound evaluation of the pregnancy before performing any surgical or otherwise significant medical or surgical procedure on a pregnant woman. It is essential to know the location of the pregnancy and the estimated gestational age, and whether the unborn child has cardiac activity. It is also necessary to rule out uterine anomalies. An ultrasound most accurately provides this information to the physicians and to the lady. Okay, accurate information regarding these factors facilitates obtaining proper informed consent and allows for any necessary alteration to the proposed procedure for efficacy and for patient safety. The provision of an ultrasound is especially important for a woman considering a chemical abortion. It can be a life-saving in some circumstances. Requiring an ultrasound before a chemical abortion serves three important. It confirms the viable pregnancy, it confirms that the pregnancy is not ectopic, and it verifies gestational age. 10 to 20% of pregnancies end in miscarriage. Knowing whether or not a pregnancy is viable can prevent a woman from undergoing an unnecessary abortion procedure. And sometimes a pregnancy can develop in the abdominal cavity, fallopian tubes, or the cervix. This is also known as an ectopic pregnancy. Pregnancies are not viable and can cause life-threatening blood loss to a woman if not properly treated. And importantly, chemical abortion is specifically not designed or contradicted for ectopic pregnancies. And an ultrasound uses wave technology to examine the unborn child, including determining gestational age. And the Food and Drug Administration approved chemical abortion regime is only available, and that's why this is so critical in this legislation. Up to 10 weeks of gestational age is not approved for latter gestational state. So that's the reasoning behind we want to make sure that we have an accurate timeline so that we don't step outside of the way that it's regulated. The majority of states maintain ultrasound requirements for abortion. 27 states regulate the provision of ultrasound by abortion providers. 14 states mandate the performance of an ultrasound before an abortion. And most states with ultrasound requirements also require that the woman be given the opportunity to view the ultrasound. Wyoming law currently makes ultrasound optional. It only requires that the woman be given the opportunity to undergo and view an ultrasound prior to the abortion. But this option can be manipulated by abortionists who may encourage mothers or discourage mothers from receiving important potential life-saving ultrasounds. Notably, it creates an exemption for ectopic pregnancies, situations where an ultrasound is necessary to properly identify and to treat the woman. Another portion of this, senators, is what's to be considered, I believe, in this, and is why it's important that this be amended and brought with this legislation, is that chemical abortions have increased 120% in the past 10 years. And so something that we also need to recognize that there are real protection issues here for the ladies that decide to do this. And so with that, I would stand for any questions. Thank you for your time.
Questions for Representative? See none. Thank you very much, Representative. Oh, you got one. You got to put up all 5 fingers, not one. Go ahead, Senator Hutchins.
Chair. Representative Nyman, thank you for that information, because at first I was thinking, chemical abortions, what does it matter? And now I see it does matter. Having that knowledge that you could be 15 weeks, not 10 or below 10. So with that, you mentioned that the chemical abortions have increased with 20% since when?
120% in the past 10 years.
Chair,
That's
please.
10
I'm
years.
sorry, through the chair, through Mr. Chairman.
Thank you,
Hutchins had a point.
Mr. Chair. And quickly, what could be the result of a young lady going in thinking, hey, I've only been pregnant for a week, but she's really 15 weeks, her taking that chemical, what could happen to her if you know? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Niner.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hutchings, well, that's the whole point of it. And when these drugs were designed initially, that was a requirement that they have an ultrasound because they're designed to be only up to 10 weeks. And for example, for size, these feet are the exact size of a 10-week-old fetus. So that's why it's so critical, and that's why it's so necessary, and that's what brought the idea of this to fruition, is that we want to make sure that we don't potentially damage the mother that has chosen this potential procedure. But if we're using chemicals that are not designed to be able to end a pregnancy that is of that size, gestational age in which an ultrasound provides for us is critical in making that decision. And ultimately, it provides protection to the mother, not for the baby, but for the mom.
Thank you. Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So you brought attention to this ultrasound issue, and so I'm going to take you to page 9, line 9. And what is not in this bill is what a viable intrauterine pregnancy is. So current state, so what is viability in this? Because it's not an exception on page 2 and 3, but it is here. So what does viability in this bill mean? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Nyman.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Barlow, to me, viability, as we're discussing this in regards to chemical abortions, is we need to make sure that we know where that pregnancy has taken place. Is that this is that is an intrauterine viable pregnancy, that is where it will be handled by those chemicals if they so see fit to end the pregnancy in that way. If it's a pregnancy that's unviable pregnancy, would be one that would be like a molar pregnancy or an ectopic pregnancy, which takes place in other positions in the body, which can bring issues that would have to be dealt with because of where that would take place. What we're looking for is to make sure that of the placement, the gestational age of the child, to make sure that if the mother sees fit to end the pregnancy this way, that we don't put her life at risk by not recognizing and realizing where that viable pregnancy. It's sad, sir, to say that we have to make sure that baby is fully alive and fully healthy, and we have to know that it's implanted in the proper location before we can end the life for the safety of the mother.
Follow-up, Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the way I read this, look at this sentence, which is a very long sentence, an entire almost paragraph of a sentence. They are separate issues: gestational age, comma, location, comma, verify a viable. And so viability in this conversation, having been doing this for 12 years, comes up with fetal anomalies, fatal fetal anomalies. So is this a place where someone could make the case with a diagnosis of a fatal fetal anomaly that pregnancy is not viable? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Barlow, in the discussion that we had, it was the fact that 20% of pregnancies in miscarriage. And so that was the reason that with viability is if that's a viable child in their life child, and if it's not, then there's no reason to subject this woman to a chemical abortion. Viability is life or death, is what they're trying to find out there, I believe. Whether or not it's necessary to put the gal through this.
Okay, thank you, Representative. Further questions? Seeing none, thank you. Okay, with that, let's bring the departments up. Department of Health. Welcome back, Director. We should just leave that seat adjusted to your height. You're here often. Go ahead.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Stephen Johansson, Director for the Wyoming Department of Health, joined by Laura Hudspeth, the head of our Office of Healthcare Licensing and Survey. You've kept her busy this session, so good to be with you again. Mostly here, Mr. Chairman, just to answer questions you might have. By way of background, our Office of Healthcare Licensing and Survey really handles two functions. One is state licensure of certain healthcare facilities that are articulated in statute. So hospitals, nursing homes, boarding facilities, ambulatory surgical centers, which are mentioned in this bill, among others. That's on the state side, which this bill really deals with, or increasing state rules and regulations on ambulatory surgical centers. The other side of the licensing and survey house that we operate is really on behalf of CMS certification for Medicare and Medicaid. We're not really talking about that part of the operations. As I mentioned, Mr. Chairman, mostly here to answer questions, but given the discussion this morning, did want to point out somewhat of a peculiarity in the bill where we have more questions than we do answers. And it was brought up earlier on the bottom of page 8, going into page 9, where the House amendment adding provisions related to substances or chemical abortions are further regulated. Representative Lawley, in her discussion of some technical amendments, would obviously amend the title of the bill since it was specific to surgical abortion and surgical abortion facilities. But I did want to make the committee aware that within the provision in the new section 356205, but really starting on page 9, line 1s through 15, no comment or questions on the content here or the intent of the House. Just want to let the committee know the Department of Health does not have licensure authority. And even if this bill were to pass as is, our licensure authority would only extend to the expanded definition now through this bill of ambulatory surgical centers. So not OBGYN clinics, not primary care offices, not the offices of private physicians who may, prescribe, chemical abortions or substances used for those. Now, presumably, if the bill passed, they would have to follow the law. But I want the committee to be clear, there would be no regulatory authority of providers in this case who are not ambulatory surgical centers or surgical abortion facilities for us to follow up and ensure that that was happening. Again, the definitions, which was discussed earlier a few minutes ago in the bill, provide for not only what an abortion is, but also what a ambulatory surgical center is, now including surgical abortion facilities, and what those prescriptive regulations would look like from our Office of Licensing and Survey. Should this bill pass, we would work, immediately to update those rules and regulations, the survey procedures, documentation, et cetera. But there would be, on page 9, there really would be no licensure authority for non-ambulatory surgical centers for the department to follow up on. With that, Mr. Chairman, Laura and I are happy to answer any questions you might have.
Questions, committee, Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So to be clear, you heard the adjustment that Representative Lawley made. She was going to strike out licensure requirements verification, is my understanding. But I would also go back, and maybe this, Mr. Chairman, if I could, to, this also doesn't have anything to do with an abortion facility either. So you're suggesting that could be stricken too, and just stick with, anyway, Mr. Chairman, just clarify what we're trying to get to here, potentially.
Director.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Barlow, yes, in general, I think that would be appropriate. It really, I don't have a great answer because, we have laws on the books where it is a law, but there's no agency or regulatory authority to enforce it other than, potentially someone reporting it to law enforcement and an investigation legally happening. Again, I just want to be clear that under our state healthcare facility licensure, not all healthcare facilities or providers are part of our licensure authority, and we're not suggesting that be the case. So you even see in the definition of ambulatory surgical centers, we do not regulate podiatrist office, dentist office. Otherwise, minor surgical procedures, lancing moles, et cetera, would require a survey and pretty thorough Department of Health regulations. I don't think that's the intent. I just want to be clear with the committee that should this pass, not to expect that the Department of Health Office of Licensing and Survey is now, has authority over or is regulating offices that may be involved in parts of these services or procedures, but do not fall under healthcare facilities or provider types that we have regulatory authority over.
Good. Senator Bouchard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So on page 5, the top paragraph, A, line 1, isn't that where your regulatory language is?
Director.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Bouchard, yes. And if you look at the language, it's a surgical abortion facility shall be licensed as an ambulatory surgical center. That will absolutely happen with any current or future surgical abortion facilities that we would license as an ambulatory surgical center should this bill pass. However, on page 9, that would presumably, based on the language, not only apply to surgical abortion facilities. So our authority to enforce this chemical abortion amendment that was made on the House would only be specific to surgical abortion facilities, not other types of clinics or providers.
Quick question for you, Director, on page 8, lines 8 through 10, it talks about the inspection. What's your inspection right now, inspection period over an ambulatory surgical facility?
Mr. Chairman, it varies across provider types. For ambulatory surgical centers, our survey window is generally in 3 to 4 year range. It's similar for critical access hospitals. It's annual for nursing homes, I believe. There's some differences within the regulatory authority there. But again, should this bill pass with its language and definitions, we would incorporate surgical abortion facilities into our normal ambulatory surgical center survey frequency.
Very good. Thank you. Further questions, committee? Thank you. Laura, would you like to share something with us today? You're going to run away, aren't you? Yep, we got another question. Don't run yet. Senator Hutchins.
It's really simple. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to make sure we're talking about the section on page 10, lines 4, where we list private physicians, dentists, or podiatry. You're saying that you don't have any regulatory authority over them. Is that correct? That
Director.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hutchings, yes, as you
wanna
see
make
in the
sure.
definition that's current statute, those providers would be accepted.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, that's all the departments in the room. We now have roughly 30 minutes left. So we're gonna have to break down time. We're not gonna get a lot of, we wanna take everybody that wants to comment, but realize we may break down your time. We may say 2 minutes each or 3 minutes each. I suspect that most everybody in the room, including the legislators, have probably heard a lot of this testimony before. We have 4 chairs. What I would like to do is bring 2 people up that are pro, 2 people that are against the bill, and we'll proceed that way if we can. So let's get 4 chairs filled if we can. My intent is that by 9:15, we will be wrapping this up and voting. So first of all, let's take those who are, sure. That, we don't know. Let's go. Let's start on this end. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Dr. Renee Hinkle. I'm an OBGYN physician in Cheyenne. I've been here for 25 years. I am a registered Republican. There are so many things, there's no way I'm going to get to all of them in the short amount of time that I have, but I think several things are important. First, this is a TRAP bill, T-R-A-P bill, as designated by American College of OBGYN. It is not specific for Wyoming. It has been brought up in at least 14 other states, so this is not an issue that Wyoming people feel that needs to be addressed. It is an anti-abortion bill, and so saying that this is protection of women is a little bit disingenuous. Secondly, abortions are procedures. They have been designated as procedures by the American College of OBGYN, and much like other procedures done in this state and many, many other clinics and non-ambulatory surgery centers, procedures are done every single day in doctors' offices and in other clinics across the state. Procedures that have a much higher risk to a patient than abortions, than procedural abortions have. Procedural abortions are very safe. Many doctors' offices, not necessarily in Wyoming, but across the country, are doing DNCs, which is basically an abortion in their offices. We do hysteroscopies, which is basically a very similar procedure without any regulation by the Department of Health. Colonoscopies, which are done on men and women are done in offices and clinics, and these are not regulated by the Department of Health and require an ambulatory surgical center. And so this really is discriminatory against women. So if you really feel that this is a health issue, then I think all procedures done in offices should be included and not a procedural abortion. And then you go down to some of the more descriptive parts of the bill. And a 10-mile radius for a physician to have privileges in a hospital is overly ambitious. The surgery centers that are currently working in this hospital have at least a 50-mile radius for surgical privileges in a hospital. And any office or clinic that does procedures, they have procedures in place for when a complication occurs. And they send, just like we do from our surgery center here in Cheyenne, we send the patient to the emergency room. That's the procedure that happens for a patient to get admitted into the hospital. So having privileges in a hospital will not change at all how a patient is treated once they get to that hospital. So really that need is definitely unnecessary. Chairman, as you pointed out, all procedures done legally done in the state of Wyoming are done by licensed professional physicians in the state. So no matter where that person also has other licenses, if they are treating somebody in the state of Wyoming, they have a license, and you already have statutes in place on how to deal with people who are illegally doing procedures in the state that don't have a license. So again, just an unnecessary portion of this bill. Life as a Human Right Act, as has been brought up many times, shows that abortions are not considered healthcare, and yet you're using the Department of Health and you're using healthcare resources to do this bill. So that also is a little bit disingenuous. There is no need for the protection of the health and safety of the mom in this situation, because these procedures are incredibly safe. They're the safest of all of the procedures I listed previously. There were
1 minute.
Okay, there were no surgical abortions done before in 2022, according to the state's own information. The ultrasound bill also has many flaws. First of all, there are studies done now in the last 2 to 3 years that have shown that the safety of a chemical abortion when done at a known facility is exactly the same safety profiles, whether an ultrasound is done or not. Ultrasounds are already done for all the things that were mentioned before. If somebody doesn't know their date, if there are risks, if there are other risks available, known, they will get an abortion, or they will get an ultrasound anyway. So again, unnecessary to regulate this from a governmental standpoint. This is government overreach into a woman's health procedure, and is not having the same regulatory done as the men in the state.
Time, that was very good. You knew right when that second hand hit. Questions, if they're brief. Senator Bouchard.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just curious as to your expertise. How many abortions have you performed?
I do not do abortions. I do.
Through the chair, please.
I'm sorry,
you're
Mr.
fine.
Chairman, Senator Bouchard. I do not do abortions. I do medical procedures that are recommended by the American College of OBGYN that are basically the same as abortions. And there are times when there are fetal anomalies that have an indicated reason for ending the pregnancy that I do, but I don't do procedural abortions for that these would be regulated for.
Thank you. No further questions. Let's move down the road. Thank you, Doctor.
Good morning, members of the committee. Chairman Baldwin, members of the committee. My name is Greg Hunter from Laramie, Wyoming. I'm just a citizen that was listening to this presentation of Representative Lawley, and she's stated that we have taken away a constitutional right, that was constitutional by Dobbs. And While I would admit that Roe was incorrectly decided, as a woman's right should have held for 9 months, I think it's clear we can find people that ignore the Ninth Commandment as easy as they ignore the Ninth Amendment. I think if you look across the country, Dobbs has been proven a disaster. And if you look at like my original state of Ohio, which was gerrymandered into being Republican, passing heartbeat bills, when the people of Ohio were given a chance, they virtually said Dobbs is a disaster. They enshrined abortion rights in the Constitution. They also legalized a plant called marijuana. So when given an opportunity, unlike the people of Wyoming, we did not get a ballot initiative. We did not get a interim committee. What we got are trigger bills without having any discussion of the Constitution and what that means. If you look at the Bill of Rights, and you look at the Constitution, I can't see how you can say that you can come in and manage a womb. I mean, when I get to the Third Amendment, we can't house the military in my house. I think that people understand the common sense that if you can't have the military in your house, certainly the state should not come in and manage a womb. I find the last 50 years, I've heard all these nuances about doing this and doing that. Had Roe been decided, we would not be here today. Had Roe been decided this is a constitutional right, as it was correctly decided.
1 minute.
I can keep going for 1 minute. If we look across, people understand common sense. Given them a chance to vote, abortion rights would be enshrined in Wyoming. That is the fact. However, gerrymandering allows that single issue candidates get elected, which kind of degrades the laws that we get. I can look at Ohio. It is very corrupt now because of some of these issues. So I grow tired of hearing all these things, and I really do love the Constitution and our rights, but you're eroding, the legislature is eroding the right between, I mean, we're enshrining religious rights with the power of the state, and that will cause problems. This country was formed watching religious wars. We decimated the world over religion. So keeping religion out of our laws is very, very good. Please do it.
Okay. Okay, brief and quick
I
question, if
have-
you would. Sir, we have a question.
So I just have one statement and a
Is it
question.
a statement or a question? We don't have time for statements, sir. If you got a question, give him a question. Go
If he
ahead.
thinks I was gerrymandered in, he's not really
Okay,
paying
that's-
attention.
Okay,
So-
people in the audience and committee, remember, we're not here to debate with the testifiers. We don't need a response, please.
Ninth and
We
10th
don't-
Amendment, have you
response.
read
Okay.
the Ninth and
The
10th Amendment?
Senator, please. Sir, you're go ahead and have a seat. Next on the amendment, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, members of the Senate Labor, Health, and Social Services
Quick, before you
Committee.
start, if we got more people that are going to testify, you need to get up here now, or you won't be testifying. Go ahead, sir, I'm
My
sorry.
name is Ross Schriftman. I am the voluntary president of the 600-member Natrona County chapter of Wyoming Right to Life and a member of the Jewish Pro-Life Foundation. I come before you in support of House Bill 148. You have copies of my written testimony, so I'll summarize. We know that the laws that were passed by our elected legislators are on hold. Many abortion businesses publicize that they do surgical abortions during the second trimester after conception. The second trimester runs from 13 to 27 weeks after conception. At 22 weeks, the baby is about the size of my hand. One of the procedures that's done at that time is a dilation and evacuation. It involves an abortion doctor using tools to tear the baby from the mother's womb in pieces. There are many significant risks to women going through this procedure, including bleeding, parts of the baby left inside the uterus, infections, difficulties with future pregnancies, such as miscarriages and the potential for infertility. Even deaths have occurred. There are even risks during the first trimester. The owner of an abortion business in our state testified before the House Judiciary Committee that studies show that 72% of women who go through first trimester abortions experience no complications. That means that 28% do experience complications. In the challenge document brought against our Life is a Human Right Act, this same owner stated several times in her declaration to the court that surgical abortions are invasive, and she acknowledged that these procedures have risks. This legislation will require inspections, as mentioned, and other requirements.
1 minute.
When a woman is injured and has to go to the hospital, do they call 911 for an ambulance, or do they drive the woman to the hospital? The state has a responsibility to protect the safety of women. I want to, in my last time, I want to mention the 10-mile requirement. A location is reasonable, and their opposition to that requirement does not match the business plans of any abortion business. A surgical abortion center would not establish a business in a sparsely populated area. These businesses choose to locate in areas with significant enough population to make it profitable to do abortions. The one business that's operating in our state is 2 blocks from a hospital, and in a city with 60,000 people, which would make their business profitable. While I pray that the horrors of abortion and the death of children in Wyoming will end soon, in the meantime, we must do all we can to protect women who are also the victims.
Time.
I'll stand for questions.
Thank you. See no questions. Mr. Winnie.
Mr. Chairman, excuse me, Mr. Chairman, Bill Winnie, Sublette County. I don't know why my throat is doing this. Late in my career, circa 1994, I took command of a large Navy ship with women on the crew. The Navy has long had rules that say women cannot go under, if a pregnant woman cannot be underway on a Navy ship. I had a medical department, 3 doctors on board, senior doctor, senior level, and I sat down with them very early on and said, okay, make me smart. What's the issue here? You know, even something as simple as a berth shift where you move the ship around a harbor, you cannot have a pregnant woman on that ship. And his explanation was pretty straightforward. Though rare, there are complications that can take a woman's life in minutes to an hour. And so you need the ability to get them to appropriate care quickly. Even though we had some surgical capability on board that ship, it was also rather dated equipment. Ship was commissioned in 1963. So from that, I conclude that properly prepared and adequate facilities with properly trained medical people to handle those kind of things are important. And I would note that the things I just discussed about the Navy's requirements is not an issue of religion. It is an issue of healthcare. So subject to your questions, thank you.
Seeing no questions. Thank you, Mr. Winnie. 2 empty seats. We're going to run out of time here quickly. Go ahead, ladies. Whoever wants to be first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Elizabeth Youngman. I am a student at the University of Wyoming, and I'm the president of Students for Reproductive Rights. And I just want to say that I strongly oppose House Bill 148. And I think when considering a decision like this, you should consider what the reaction of students and young people in this state will be if these abortion restrictions go through, because I've spoken to a number of students who were born and raised in Wyoming and don't want to stay here anymore if the attacks on abortion continue. And I really think that you should consider that when making this decision. And so on behalf of Students for Reproductive Rights at the University of Wyoming, we strongly oppose House Bill 148. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Seeing none. Go ahead, ma'am.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Sharon Brightweiser, Pro-Choice Wyoming. We're opposed to the bill. Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure, given the time constraints, of what your plans might be for the online. I believe we may have a couple of people signed up, and I would defer to them if possible and reserve the time to speak again if there's time. So if that's possible, I believe Giovanni Anthony and Amy Robom may have registered ahead of time.
We will be taking online. If you have anything else you want to say, go ahead.
Okay, yeah, I would like to use some time, and then thank you, Mr. Chairman. One thing that hasn't really been addressed that's extremely concerning to us is the 48-hour waiting period. We've seen proposals, I believe the first one I worked on was in 1993 to implement these waiting periods here in the Wyoming legislature. Having to travel, you mentioned the possibility, Mr. Chairman, of having to travel for an ultrasound, but having to travel to a clinic and then wait 48 hours, either go back home or make the trip again. We're hearing that some of our current providers have been seeing people that have driven many hours, even one way, to get to their facility. There's this idea that, well, you know, they can get the free ultrasound at a crisis pregnancy center and then 48 hours go. But the crisis pregnancy centers are religious ministries that are opposed to abortion. There's nothing in the law that requires them to even provide a written certification to the abortion provider. Many of the actual doctors and medical people may be reluctant. It's my understanding there are no actual licensing requirements for ultrasound technicians based on my limited review of this past week. So very concerned about that, but also opposed to everything else in this bill for all the reasons listed by the others. Thank you very much, committee.
Thank you very much. Okay. If it's a quick question, we got to
It's a
get moving.
quick
Senator Hutchins.
question.
The bill is at risk here, but go ahead.
I missed your name, ma'am.
I'm sorry, it's Sharon Breitweiser.
Sharon, quickly, when a woman wants an abortion, does she just go to a clinic and generally, without any law, they just get her in there and do the abortion? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Senator Hutchings. No, and that's another very, very good point that's been raised. The medical personnel at clinics or the licensed doctors that are working with these patients, they provide counseling. They make absolutely certain that a woman has considered the option. They don't rush anyone in. I'm a little concerned about some of the comments we've heard today about botched abortions and doctors manipulating the procedure. I believe the doctors and their staff are very concerned about the well-being of their patients, and they're very sure. And most women have absolutely given this thought and made a considered reasonable decision to go with this. They're not just walking in off the street and getting an abortion on demand, so to speak. So thank you for that question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just quickly, so the
Okay,
48
but
hours is not an
you-
issue.
Before you ask any more questions, know that, look
All
at the time.
I'm just wanting to know.
Okay, let's go ahead and move on. Go ahead to testimony, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just kind of wanted to address a point that was brought up in the other chamber, that the necessity of this bill somehow concedes that people think that abortion is healthcare. I would strongly resist that, as Representative Lawley brought to the attention. As long as abortion is legal in Wyoming, it makes sense to hold these facilities to standards. But we strongly would resist that idea that somehow we're conceding in this. And I made this point in the past, but I think it is an important point, that the state has a vested interest in the equal application of its laws. And just quickly, two particular points where it's not doing that. Number one, Wyoming statute holds that an assault against a pregnant mother leading to the death of that preborn child, that assailant can be charged with a homicide. Throughout statute, the state claims authority to intercede even in that parent-child relationship when it deems it must do so according to the best interest of a child. And so and that's an important claim of authority that the state holds. And so we have, on one hand, a claim to authority by the state, and another situation where the state is being told it could pretty much close its eyes to the existence of that child. I think it's critical that the state equally applies its laws across the board. And I think also when it comes to, resisting the politicization of judiciary nominations, if we want to avoid what happened at the federal level, it's in the best interest of the state here to equally apply its laws. With that, I would stand for any questions.
Thank you. Questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Let's move to online, please. Those who are going to testify online realize that we're very short on time. If it's been said, give it as simple as you can. But go
Mr.
ahead.
Chairman, we have at least 3 people online with their hands up. I'm admitting those 3.
If they're quick, we'll hear all 6. Let's hear the first one first. Go ahead and identify yourself, ma'am, and give us a brief testimony if you would.
Is that me?
That's you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman Baldwin. My name is Marcy Shaver from Torrington. I'm also the Wyoming State Director for American Atheists. I strongly oppose HB 148 because it's another attempt at infusing religion into our law. And just because a few sanctimonious people think that women shouldn't have abortions, they're trying to make it as difficult as possible with this cookie cutter trap law that's actually worse than any trap law I've ever seen. And I'm probably the only person in this room who has had to have 7 abortions. I'm probably more of an expert on that than anybody. That under these laws, I would have died here, okay? Thank you.
Thank you. Next testimony, please. What you got up next, Donna? You choose one.
I have Amy Robohm.
Amy, are you with us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Go ahead, yes.
Good morning, Chairman Baldwin and members of the committee. My name is Amy Robohm. I'm a family nurse practitioner in Laramie with almost 35 years of experience providing healthcare to patients of reproductive age. I'm testifying to bring to the attention of the committee the position of the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists regarding abortion. ACOG is the preeminent professional medical organization of our country that provides evidence-based recommendations regarding the evaluation and management of reproductive health concerns. ACOG acknowledges that safe and legal abortion is a necessary component of comprehensive medical care. I sent all the members of the committee a link to ACOG's committee opinion number 815 from December 2020. In this position paper, ACOG calls for the cease and repeal of all legislation that creates barriers to abortion access or interferes with the patient-clinician relationship in the practice of medicine. ACOG specifically opposes legislation known as trap laws that attempt to limit access to abortion services by imposing unnecessary facility and staffing requirements. House Bill 148 is an example of a trap law because it would impose excessive restrictions on abortion clinics and providers. This bill, which requires that a surgical abortion facility be licensed as an ambulatory surgical center and requires physicians to have admitting privileges, is unnecessary because the actual risk of complications from abortion procedures is so very low. In addition, in requiring an ultrasound and a 48-hour waiting period, this bill incorrectly assumes that women do not already understand what it means to be pregnant and have not already carefully considered their medical conditions and options. ACOG opposes such requirements because they improperly regulate medical care, do not improve patient safety, and make abortion more expensive for the patients who can least afford them. By delaying or denying individuals access to safe and legal abortion services, this bill only causes more harm to the women it claims to protect. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I apologize up front for being short with people, but we need to get done. Go ahead and give us who's next on.
Yeah, I have Christine Lichtenfels next.
Christy? Are you there?
I am here. Good morning, Chairman
Tell us who you
Baldwin
are.
and
Go
members of the committee. And I will just go fast since people, Dr. Hinkle and Sharon Breitweiser and Amy Robohm have made all good points, which I incorporate. I'm just going to suggest that this is not going to help women. We're going to just increase the maternal health care desert that we've already got with OBGYNs leaving as they're feeling more criminalized. And as someone who has had an abortion here in Wyoming, I can say that if I had been subject to a 48-hour waiting period, it's just so demeaning and insulting to women to suggest that we don't make up our own minds. We do not need government intruding into our decision-making process over something, medical decision like that. So I'll just leave it at that. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you very much for coming in today. Appreciate your testimony. Next, Donna.
I have Julie Burkhart next.
Ms. Burkhart, go ahead, ma'am.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and committee members. My name is Julie Burkhart. I'm the president and founder of Wellspring Health Access. We're the organization that operates the state's only procedural and medication abortion facility in Wyoming. Thank you for the opportunity. For those who are unsure about the origin and intent of this bill, please make no mistake. This bill is targeted at us, Wellspring Health Access, which I had stated is the only procedural and medication abortion clinic in the state. The sole purpose of this bill is to put us out of business, thus restricting healthcare services to people with punitive, detrimental measures that increase cost and restrict healthcare options. The facts simply don't substantiate the necessity for this bill or enhance the equality of patient care. The realistic implications of this TRAP bill would force us to undergo more construction on an already new facility for things such as expanding our hallways, altering the dimensions of our procedure rooms, changing our HVAC system, potentially reconfiguring our janitorial setup. There are any number of things structurally that we might have to do. This bill would also compel physicians who practice at our clinic to obtain hospital admitting privileges, which are unnecessary. And oftentimes, and most times in my experience, due to the politics of abortion and the few number of hospital admittance cases, are impossible to obtain.
If you could
What
wrap.
I can tell you that we do have emergency protocols. We have the capability and procedures for transferring patients. We also are appropriately licensed and insured in the state of Wyoming, and we comply with all CLIA and OSHA regulations. You know, I do agree that the legislature has the right to regulate healthcare, but it has to be in an evidence-based, scientific way and in an equitable way for all Wyomingites. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you very much. Is that Donna?
And the last person I have is Barbara.
Barbara?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Barbara Close.
Short time, go ahead.
Yes, sir. I will keep it brief. I am a Wyoming Republican and Christian. A couple items I just want to address that were heard in the testimony. The item around childbirth not being allowed on ships. Statistically, childbirth has a higher mortality rate, something you're allowed to do in your own home, than procedural abortions. The crisis centers mentioned regarding ultrasounds. I had to have an ultrasound. It was $700 with insurance as ordered by my provider. The crisis centers are religious facilities, not medical facilities that we would be pushing women to. I would suggest you give more weight to the testimony from medical professionals than any religious professionals in the room. The only item talking about miscarriage in the Bible about the loss of pregnancy is in the Old Testament. Even if that argument wants to be made, that Old Testament treats the miscarriage, the loss of a child, a fetus, as property damage, not as murder. So respectfully, please keep religion out of Wyoming, out of this vote. It does not belong in our legislative process, and I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to see you're in a car but not driving. Thank you. Okay, is that it, Donna? Okay, we're going to close public testimony so we can get this voted on. Committee, do I have a motion? Moved by Senator Hutchings. Well, a second by Senator Dockstader, who ran. Okay, discussion. Would anybody like to introduce the amendments? Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think, first of all, I don't know that all the amendments are necessary, and there's actually maybe a little different way to approach them. So I'm not going to propose the amendments that were provided by Ms. Lawley. We can do that on a committee of the whole if we choose to, but I'll visit with Ms. Lawley about that.
Okay. Go ahead, Senator Hutchins.
I'd like to.
Mike, please.
I'd like to go ahead and dispense with the amendments now. Let's just get them over with. They're very simple. Take care of them now.
You're talking about the one that's, the one you have
Ones that
written?
we have here, yep.
So you're moving that amendment? Is
Yes,
that
sir.
correct? Okay. Simple vote. There's only three of us. All those in favor of the amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. No. That amendment fails, but I do suggest if you want to work on that with Senator Barlow and bring it as a committee of the whole amendment. Further discussion, committee. I have 2 absentee votes for those who are not here. I would just discuss just briefly, and that is, and I'm always torn on these bills, quite frankly. And the good senator sitting out here staring at me knows that I voted both ways on these bills, but I think I'm persuaded after reading through this bill, I'll probably be a no vote. It will pass committee, there's no doubt. But I think there's several weaknesses in the bill. Admitting privileges, I think, is a flaw. And as I pointed out, I think we cover a lot of areas in the bill that are already in statute. I think it would have been better left out of the bill, but that's my opinion, I get that. Okay, let's go ahead and take a vote, Donna.
This is a roll call vote on House Bill 148 engrossed. Senator Barlow.
Aye.
Senator Bouchard.
He left an aye.
Senator Dockstader.
He left an aye.
Senator Hutchings. Chairman Baldwin.
No.
We have 4 aye and 1 no, Mr. Chairman.
Do we have somebody presenting that bill on the floor? Okay, whoever stands up first, I will pick on. Okay, thank you very much, everyone, for testifying and for being here. Friday, committee.